Welcome to the Agent of Wealth podcast with Marc Bautis from Bautis Financial. In this podcast, Marc helps guide you towards financial freedom, ensure you never run out of money, and create a balance in life that prioritizes what is most important to you. Join us for this journey as Marc draws from years of expertise and guest experts to solve the multiple wealth building challenges involved in your financial life.
Welcome back to the Agent of Wealth. On today's show, we brought on a special guest, John Warrilow. John's the founder of the Value Builder System, a software tool for building and increasing the value of a company. John's also the author of multi best-selling books. The latest one, which he released this year, is titled The Art of Selling Your Business, Winning Strategies and Secret Hacks for Exiting on Top. John is also the host of Built to Sell Radio, where he's interviewed hundreds of founders about their exit from their business. So if you're a business owner or even thinking about starting a business, you'll definitely want to listen in to today's episode. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So I'm excited about today's show. We work with a lot of business owners, and we see the struggle that they have really tapping the value of that business. How did you get started in working with? Is it something you've always worked with business owners, and specifically, obviously, their exits or increasing their value?
Yeah, I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for a while, and I guess my initiation was a bit cold and curious into this world of building value. I used to run a market research company. We did quantitative market research. We had great clients. We had Bank of America was a customer, American Express was a customer. These very very fancy brands, and we did quantitative market research. The challenge was every project was different and unique, and yet we were very profitable, 20, 30% profit margins. So it was a good business, maybe 5 or 6 million in revenue. And I went to see an M&A guy. Guy's name is Perry Miele, based in Toronto. I'll never forget, this goes back 20 years. And I kind of was rubbing my hands together thinking, oh man, this is going to be great. We've got this great business. It's got to be worth a truckload. And I said to Perry, what do you think it's worth? And he said, well, let me ask you a couple of questions. Like, who does the research? And I'm like, well, it's Bank of America. I mean, I got to show up for that. I mean, it's big client. He said, okay, who does the selling? I'm like, well, you can't send anyone other than the founder to see American Express. Or he's like, okay, John, let me get straight. You're in the research business. You do the research. You do the selling. And I'm like, all right, I can see where this is going. He said, John, there's nothing here to sell. I mean, your company's worthless. And man, it just felt like a gut punch, right? Because sure. I walked into that meeting thinking I was sitting on this gold mine, right? And despite having lots of profit and lots of great clients, it was, in his view, worthless. And that kicked off for me this odyssey, this journey, 20 years now, of trying to understand what it is that makes your business more valuable. Long story short, that story had a bit of a happy ending. We ultimately changed it. Subscription model, hired a bunch of salespeople, and it was acquired by a public company years later. And it has a bit of a Cinderella story ending to it. But that moment in Perry's office was when I really started to think, okay, I need to think differently about my company.
Sure. And so what did you do next? Was it start another company, or did you go specifically into working with business owners?
Well, we spent 2 or 3 years making that business more sellable, putting it on subscription model, selling it. And then I wrote a book called Built to Sell. And that was really, some people write books because they have something to sell or they've got a business they want to promote. That was not my intention with Built to Sell. It was, I felt like I'd learned a bunch of stuff, made a bunch of mistakes, and wanted to help as many people as I could sort of avoid some of the stuff that I'd screwed up, frankly. And I wrote it all down. And kind of, we moved away. We actually moved to Europe for a bunch of years right after that book was published, which is like the worst thing you could possibly do as an author is to leave town. You're like, hey, can you come speak at our conference? I'm like, yeah, but you got a 3-leg flight that you got to do. And it's like a big nightmare. So anyways, it was the worst thing that you could possibly do, but it really kicked off this journey that I'm, now on with Value Builder, where we've developed a software based largely on some of the principles in the book Built to Sell, which entrepreneurs use to help them improve the value of their company leading up to an exit. So that's kind of what I do now 90% of the time.
So how does Value Builder work? It's a business owner comes in, and their goal is obviously to increase the value of their business. Give me an example of a walkthrough of how they would go through that software that you have.
Yeah. So the first thing they do is they start with us by getting their value builder score. When I say us, they actually don't come to us. They go to one of our advisors. So we have advisors around the world who have licensed to offer the value builder system to their clients. So it's coaches, consultants, et cetera. The value builder system the first thing they do is get their score. And what's interesting is the average score is 59 out of a possible 100 when you begin. And we've looked now at the offers those businesses get. Now, we've had 60,000 businesses go through, so we're pretty, we've got a decent data set. And we know the average business starts at a score of 59, and those companies trade or get offers of 3.5 times their pre-tax profit. So relatively, modest, multiple of earnings. If you go through the value builder system and improve your score up to 90 or greater, so this would be sort of our all-star team. These are the best, performers. Those businesses on average are getting 7.1 times pre-tax profit. It's a process we take owners through to help them think differently about their company and build it so that it would be, valuable to somebody else.
So I'm sure the answer is that it varies, but how long does it typically take a company to go through that average score of 59 to get to, something in the 80s, 90s?
We actually did some research with an advisor of ours, and they looked at an 8-month window, and they had everybody begin the value builder system at month 1, and then by month 8 they went back and looked at how much of an improvement each business had, and on average they'd improved by 18%. So again, you can kind of extrapolate back as to whether you think you've got an average business, below average, above average, and then how quickly you accelerate. But I think within a year you can make a material impact on the value of your company. Like usually it's 6-7 figures worth of sort of value that we were able to realize for the owners that go through it. So yeah, it's been it works well.
So is it that coach or that consultant, are they working with the company too, or are they kind of doing it themselves via the software? What happens in that year?
The advisor meets with the owner usually once a month, and there's 12 basically modules. Think of it as like a stair-stepped approach. Each step leads to the next step. There's 12 unique steps. And so at the beginning of every month, the advisor will assign some homework for you as an owner, a video tutorial that you've got to watch. And then in month 2, you meet with your advisor. And that's where you and your advisor would discuss what came out of completing the questionnaire, watching the video, et cetera. And then that meeting would then trigger into a subsequent set of steps that the owner would take leading up to the next step. So one step, 1 month, usually within 12 months, you've made material improvements, and then it begins again. It's a circular process. So year 2, you should go back to month 1. And of course, everything's changed in your company, and you go through the same set of steps, hopefully at that point with a more valuable company.
Sure. Going back to that original example you gave of your market research company, both research and sales, I come across that typical business a lot where, it's the business is really dependent on the owner or one particular person. Are there simple things or things that type of business can do to make themselves more sellable or more valuable?
Yeah, I think it comes down to identifying your TVR. And what I mean by TVR is TVR stands for teachable, valuable, repeatable. So I think the challenge with a lot of businesses is, and we talked about this before we hit record, they start and it's because they have an expertise, something that really they've got a unique knowledge around or something that they do really well. And so they begin and everybody kind of wants that service or product, but quickly you reach a plateau after which you've kind of run out of hours in the day. It might happen at 100,000 in revenue or 200,000 in revenue, 500,000 in revenue, where you just can't grow anymore because there are no more hours in the day. And so you've got to hire people. The challenge is that when you hire people, 9 women can't have a baby in 1 month. It takes years, to effectively teach employees what you know, right? What it's taken you decades to learn. And so usually employees never really meet your expectations. And then you kind of throw your hands up in the air and go, nobody does it as well as I do. I've just got to do it myself. And you get stuck in this perpetual sort of ceiling beyond which you can't grow your company. And it's deeply dependent on you. And frankly, it's not sellable, as I found out the hard way at that point. And so again, I think the step that you want to take if you find yourself in that spot is to sit down and grab a whiteboard or a piece of paper and do your TVR. So what that involves is write down all the services and products you sell. and then give them a score out of 10 on the degree to which you could teach employees to deliver them. That's teachable. Valuable is to the extent to which they're valuable coming from you. And the opposite of valuable is that they're a commodity. And the third is repeatable, meaning customers have a repeat need for that product or service, a recurring need for that product or service. Then you look at them and you identify which ones score the lowest. In other words, are likely most dependent on you and least scalable. And you ask yourself, is it worth continuing those when you could focus more on your TVR? And I think that's an important process to go through for any, in particular, service business where they're selling an expertise. That's a really important sort of step to go through.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And is there, I guess, not just for the business that's dependent on one person or a couple of people, but is there a right time to sell? What I've heard from business owners is, yeah, our business is doing great. And then they're starting to look marketable, valuable. And they say, I want to sell, but I don't want to leave too much on the table because, my business is growing and I know next year it's going to be probably worth more than it is this year. How do they, and I'm sure there's other things that come into play than just looking at a valuation or numbers on when to sell. But how does someone know, yeah, this is the right time and we've gotten to the point where we can put a lot more effort in, but the value we're going to get for trying to make it more valuable is not worth it, to what we could get for the business now?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It comes back to the initial point you made, which is trying to decide when to sell your company is a really tricky thing. And when I talk to entrepreneurs, it sounds like you do this too, Mark. They kind of, in their own mind, want to sell at a peak, right? They want to sell when, the business is booming, the economy's at a peak, interest rates are low. Like they've got all this confluence of events that need to kind of come together. And if you're that good, I mean, good on you. But I think most of us are not that good at predicting the future. The other thing I would say is most businesses will have some sort of transition period earnout where part of their proceeds will be tied to the goals the company has in the future. If you peak at the time of transaction, your chances of hitting your earnout and the corresponding payout associated with that really drops. And so now you're trying to kind of time it 2 or 3 years before your peak. And that's really even more difficult. When I talk to entrepreneurs, I find that they're in this sort of PERMA 5 stage. PERMA 5 is when you talk to an entrepreneur and you say, have you ever thought about selling this company? It looks really profitable. You got all this revenue. And they say, yeah, you know what? We're probably 3, maybe 5 years away from selling. And then you bump into them again 5 years later and they're like, hey, did you sell that company? And they're like, well, no, we got a new location, we got a new product. So we're probably 5 years away from selling, right? So it's this kind of permanently 5 years away. And I think that's really common and it's natural, right? We're optimists as entrepreneurs, but it also means that we run the risk, I think, of riding it over the top. Right. And what I mean by that is effectively reaching a point in your business where the best days are behind it. And by chasing the next tranche of revenue, the next product launch, you effectively destroy a lot of value. I'm reminded about, you mentioned my podcast in your intro. I do this podcast called This Radio where I interviewed Rand Fishkin. Have you ever had Rand on the show?
No.
Great entrepreneur, built a company called Moz up to around $5 million in revenue. Now, Moz is a software company and they have really high valuations. He got a call from a guy named Brian Halligan, who was at the time the co-founder and is now the co-founder of HubSpot, the big all-in-one marketing software. And Halligan offers Rand $25 million for his $5 million company in HubSpot stock and cash. And Rand in his mind had gotten wind from somebody that his business should be worth 4 times top line revenue. He was growing fast. And so although they were at 5, he expected to be at 10 the next year. And so in his mind, he goes back to Halligan at 40 million for a $5 million company, like ridiculous valuations, right? And Halligan, of course, says, no way, you're crazy. There's no way we'd pay that kind of money. And they part ways. Well, Rand says, well, I'll show you kind of thing. And that's not Rand's personality. He says, well, that's fine. I'll raise money. And so they raised venture capital money. They went out and raised a bunch of money and they invested in a whole bunch of other products, none of which they were truly differentiated in, most of which were sucking cash out of the company. The business started to spiral out of control. And Rand was in fact removed as the CEO by the VCs that were invested. When I interviewed Rand later, I said, Rand, what was that like? And he said, it was terrible watching my baby that I built from the sidelines. I said, but at least you've got Ma's stock. I mean, that must be worth a truckload these days. And he said, no, I don't think it's worth anything. And I said, what do you mean it's not worth anything? The way VCs invest is they get preferred shares, and the length of time, meaning they get a preferred return and they get a coupon that they cash out at the time of exit. And the length of time they've held means that they're likely as preferred shareholders to get all of their money out, and I will be left probably with nothing. And I said, Rand, what would that offer from Halligan be worth today based on the appreciation of HubSpot stock? And he's like, it'd be worth close to $200 million.
That's a tough one.
And so I tell you that story, Mark, because I think it goes back to the question you asked earlier, which is like, when's the best time? And the best time, frankly, is when someone's buying. Like when you get a call from Brian Halligan, he's ready to write you a check for $25 million. That's a good time.
Yeah.
And yes, there's a new product. Yes, there's a new client you could go win, or, a new location, but you never know. God forbid, knock wood, you never know when the next pandemic is going to happen. I think many of us are susceptible to riding it over the top for that reason.
Yeah, you mentioned, getting that call with that offer. And I think that's, bringing it back to the business owner. And, we talked a little bit about when to sell, but I think also another question that comes up a lot is who to sell to, because at some point the companies, they might be trying to fly under the radar. They don't want to get their product, their service knocked off. They don't want to, announce it from a billboard that they're looking to sell, because they might feel that sharks are going to start circling and, they look desperate and they're, going to get lowball offers. Yep. Also probably a lot of times the best people to buy are competitors. And again, going back to that, they don't want to make themselves look vulnerable if it doesn't work out or if something happens, or they don't want to give away IP through some process. And so what are some, ways that you can get the word out that you are looking to sell without, going through some of these, circumstances that you don't want to be a part of?
Yeah, you raise a ton of questions, or a ton of very, really important points. One of which in particular is this idea of like, how do I figure out how many people I should go to inquire if they're interested in buying my business? How do I keep it confidential? How do I not undermine my negotiating leverage by kind of telling the whole world that I'm for sale? It's one of those really challenging issues, because to punch above your weight when you go and sell your company, to get a really good multiple for your business, I think you need competition. You need multiple bidders. I think that's an essential ingredient to really getting a fair deal. Yet the more people you go to see if they're interested, the more the chances of this very delicate secret getting out into the world. And then you can undermine and disqualify yourself in the whole process if too many people find out. And so it's this balance between getting enough people interested while not getting so many people that you effectively let the cat out of the bag. And I think that's a very delicate dance. Part of the answer, I think, to the question is, how many people have you had inquire about buying your business? Like if you've had half a dozen really serious inquiries from buyers who look really genuine in their interest in you could be pretty sure that interest is not going to go away. And so if you've got half a dozen of those in your back pocket, you likely could go to market with just inquiring with those 6 people. I'm reminded of a neat story. I did an interview with a guy named Peter Kelly, and he started a company called OpenLane. The best way to think about OpenLane is like autotrader.com for car dealerships. We all buy used cars on AutoTrader, whereas used car dealers have no equivalent. They buy their inventory effectively at these kind of antiquated bricks and mortar auctions, right? And there's sort of 3 big auction houses where they sell the majority of these used cars. And Peter's like, this is crazy. This is the most antiquated system. These like cars drive by at like 2 kilometers an hour. And these guys with their clipboards have to bid on these cars with like, it's the most antiquated system ever. And Peter's like, there's got to be a better way. So he designs this thing called OpenLane, which is basically a website where you can buy used cars if you're a used car dealer. And he had, not surprisingly, acquisition offers from all 3 of the bricks and mortar legacy auctioneers who saw what he was doing and realized they were, he was going to put them out of business. But Peter kind of said no and kind of continued on growing the business. But he lived in fear of one thing. This is a very profitable company, but he lived in fear that the OEMs, the original equipment manufacturers, effectively the brands, BMW, Ford, whatever, would see what he was doing and build their own auction houses. I mean, think about it. If you're like a Ford dealer would you go to like some third-party auction house, or would you go to FordUsedCars.com and buy
Sure.
Ford product? Probably the latter, right? And so Peter was like, this business is amazing, but if these guys ever find out how successful my company is, I'm going to get put out of business because they're going to go do it. And so when he decided to sell his business, he intentionally did not go to the original equipment manufacturers, the car brands, even though he probably would have gotten more for his company had he made a wider auction for his business, involved more people. All he did was went to the 3 auction houses, and he's like, all right, you've all been interested in buying my company. Now's your shot. And he was careful not to reveal to the brands that he was for sale, because again, he didn't want to have them set up shop and compete. And I think that's a good example of where a limited, by the way, long story short, he sold his company for $200 million. It was an incredible outcome and a very successful story. The moral of which I think is figuring out how many people to tell is one of those really delicate, inexact sciences. But if you've had some really genuine inquiries, that can be a good place to start. If you've got at least a half a dozen of those, to start there and build out a little auction process with the people that have already sort of expressed interest.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it was good for him. He didn't have to get that secret out all over the place. And I think that's the same thing I see with a lot of the entrepreneurs or business owners is they're worried about, someone just saying, okay, we can do this and we can do it better or quicker or faster. And, they might have went in with a good intention of trying to sell their business or think about it or see what is valued. And all of a sudden now they're getting put out of business. So it's kind of almost like obviously the opposite effect of it.
Acquirers, they have to sign a non-disclosure agreement when they get underneath the sheets of your business and they try to figure out, all of what you do. Some do it with genuine interest in buying your company, but unfortunately, there are some bad actors in the acquisition space who do it for no other reason than to find out your secrets. I'm reminded of a company, a UK-based company, a guy I interviewed who built a company called eBookers. They are effectively Expedia in the UK. These businesses, these marketplaces for travel, are really based on the commission that they get from the airlines and the hotels. And the commission rate is this highly guarded secret, right? You would never reveal what commission rate you get from British Airways or from United or whatever, because that's the most important secret. Well, when eBookers went on the market, they got a bunch of people to sign the NDA. Ultimately, they got 3 parties to the table interested in buying the business, 2 of which they later found out were only interested to find out the commission rates they were getting from the airlines. They had no intention of making an acquisition offer. Yeah. And that's one of the challenging things about selling a business. It's also why I would never recommend you kind of put your business on the market to, quote, test the waters, right? You've probably heard this. You put your house on the market and see if you get the price. You can put a car on the market and see if you get your price, and you won't really be hurt in the process, right? Like your house will still be sellable after the fact. But putting your business on the market to, quote, test the waters is not a good strategy. There's just so many things that can go wrong with that approach.
And I think even kind of transitioning it into, the people I work with and just the risk that they're taking on by not selling. You have something called the freedom point. You can't just look at it as, the business is growing, but now they're just bringing on more risk, onto themselves, onto the business by not selling. So how do they address that, or what can they do about that?
Well, you're referring to the freedom point, which is the point at which the sale of your company, combined with whatever liquid wealth you've created outside of your company, basically creates a nest egg that will throw off enough passive income for you to live the lifestyle you aspire to have for the rest of your life. So when the sale of your business, combined with what other assets you've got, creates enough liquid wealth that will allow you to throw off passive income to live for the rest of your life, you've reached the freedom point. A lot of entrepreneurs reach that almost unconsciously because they start a business when they're young and they grow it every year. It grows 10 or 20%. And pretty soon they wake up at the age of 50, 55, 60, and they're like, this is a real business. Like it's worth millions of dollars. In fact, it's probably 80% of my net worth. And there again is this concept of riding it over the top. But I think once you reach the freedom point where again, the sale of your business combined with your other assets would create enough liquid wealth, I think it's asking yourself, and Warren Buffett talks about this, Mark. He says, would you risk something you value for something you don't? And for me, when I talk to entrepreneurs, I mean, some people want to be the next Steve Jobs, the next Elon Musk, but for most, I think entrepreneurs, that's their greatest aspiration. I think most of us, our greatest aspiration is for freedom, is to have freedom to decide what I'm going to do in the morning. And I think when you reach that point where the wealth you've created in your business, if liquefied, if you make it liquid, would give you that freedom, it's just worth asking yourself, you've been chasing this for years. This is why you started a business. Why would you give up the chance to have that for launching the next product or another million in revenue or whatever the thing is that you're thinking about? I think it's worth saying, maybe now's the time. And I'm reminded of a guy I interviewed way back in the beginning of Built to Sell Radio named Joey Redner. Joey started a company called Cigar City Brewing based in Tampa, Florida. Cool story. Not a lot of craft breweries in Tampa, yet the craft brewery market in the United States was exploding. And he's like, well, why don't we have something in Tampa? Builds it. And it turns out Tampa Bay people are really thirsty for craft beer because it was a huge success. And he started the business by borrowing, I think it was like $600,000 from his dad, because brewing is really capital intensive. You need the big cylinders, all this crap that I know nothing about, but it's a capital intensive business. And so he builds it, and with $600,000 from his dad. And so he's kind of paying back his dad, quickly runs out of brewing capacity. So the market's loving his beer, but he needs to expand. And so he goes and gets an SBA loan, I think for a couple $1 million, and expands his brewing capacity, meets demand. And not only does he meet demand outstrips supply again. And so now he's at the third point where he's got to expand the size of his brewing capacity. He's already in hock to his dad. He's already in hock to the SBA and the bank. And he kind of throws up his hands and says, enough. Like, I'm not doing it anymore. And he said to me, and I'll always remember the quote, he said, I feel like the blackjack player in Vegas who's just won 5 hands in a row. And the dealer's saying, okay, put all your chips back on the table and go a 6th round. And so he sold. He decided that he was going to sell. He sold his business to Oscar Blues, private equity backed group. And the rest is history. It turned out to be a very successful sale for him, also for his acquirer. It was a reminder to me that when you reach that point where creating enough money from the sale of your company would allow you to be free, like, why continue to risk it? And look, some people have aspirations they have other reasons to build a business other than wealth creation. But if wealth creation is one of them for you, I think it's worth it just asking yourself that question.
I come across a mix of people where some are like what you said, they build that business for a purpose and they stay laser focused on that. I think others may even start with that intention, and all of a sudden they see the success and they kind of get addicted to the success of building. And now it just becomes not a game, but it becomes, I want more. I want to, can this go from a 1 million to a 5 million to a 20 million? That becomes then the passion. And, on my part, it's not saying, you should do this, you should do this. It's really showing them the options or the paths that their decisions can take. And like you said, one of them is to have that freedom. What if we take the sale of the business plus other assets they have, what you have to, be able to show them, this is what that can turn into. And, just gives them the information, or maybe they kind of have their blinders on. Because one thing I see with business owners a lot is they're so laser focused on building their business that they kind of forget about everything outside it. In this case, it might be that you've built a big enough business. You've had a great success. Maybe it is the time to sell it. And maybe you can, it doesn't mean you have to go sit on a porch for the rest of your life. You can do something that you're passionate about. But again, it's going back to that freedom. It gives them the choice and the option to do exactly what they want to do.
Yeah, I love your use of the word addiction, because I do think entrepreneurship can be addictive, especially when it's going well and things are moving. I'm reminded of an interview I just did recently with a guy named Andrew Gizdecki. He was in the space where restaurants and gyms and small businesses came to him looking for a mobile application. So this was back in the early 10 years ago, say, when everybody, the iPhone just came out, everybody wanted a mobile app for their gym or their restaurant or whatever. And at the time, to do a custom mobile app was like tens of the 50, 60 grand. And these gyms and these restaurants had no money to afford this. And Gizdecki's like, well, why don't I just create like a template where we can create one piece of software and people can basically upload the key information about their gym or their restaurant, and it'll be like a template-based mobile app. I could charge people like hundreds of dollars, maybe low thousands rather than tens. And he starts a company called Business Apps. They just sell template-based websites for small businesses. And the business goes like gangbusters. He's in his 20s at the time. He's a young guy. They reached, I remember, $7 million in revenue when he got an acquisition offer for it was for 70% of the company, and they were offering $15 million, $15 million for 70% of the company. And he's like 26 years old. And he said, no. He said, like, this thing's going, it's great, it's amazing. Why would I sell, right? 2 weeks later, Apple makes a groundbreaking decision, and they decide to delist any template-based apps, any apps that were based on a template software. And literally overnight, his business is basically worthless. I mean, all of his customers, every gym, every call him up and say, like, my app's been removed from the App Store. I can't upload my app. You know, it obviously created complete chaos, which culminated in Gizdecki actually cold emailing Tim Cook after he'd watched one of his customers, a woman who'd built an app for kids who suffer from depression. And this woman had credited this app for saving her life. She'd not taken her own life because of this app. And Gizdecki sent the recording of this show that they were on to Tim Cook personally and said, is this really the kind of app you want to delist? Because it was based on his app. Right. Long story short, Tim Cook overruled the decision, changed it. Gizdecki got his apps back and he sold his business. But to your point, you know, when things are going well, everything looks like roses. And there was a period there where Gizdecki thought he might have missed the boat.
Wow. Yeah, I see that all the time too with people investing in stocks. You know, they make a stock pick and they're like, yeah, the stock is going up. The stock is good. Nothing can ever go wrong with this company. All of a sudden, something goes wrong. And yeah, Bitcoin, Tesla, there's plenty of examples that, you know, when things are going good, you don't think they're ever going to end. You think it's just going to continue. And all right, so we're just about out of time. How best can someone reach out to you, find out more about what you do, about the Value Builder system?
Yeah, in fact, thanks for asking. We put together a few resources. You can go to builttosell.com and there's a button that says free gifts. And what we've done is put together 8 videos on the 8 value drivers. We've got a worksheet that people can go through on subscription models if they're interested in creating recurring revenue, and a workbook that corresponds with the book, The Art of Selling Your Business. So if you want to apply the lessons from the book to your own company, it's a workbook you can kind of work through and answer the questions. So that's all available at builttosell.com.
Awesome. We'll link to that in the show notes. Thank you again. I think you gave a lot of great information for business owners. And really appreciate you being on.
Thanks, Mark. It was fun.
And thank you everyone for tuning in to today's episode.
Thank you for listening to the Agent of Wealth podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered represents the views and opinions of the guests and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Bautis Financial. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial planning and investment advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investments and financial planning.